Okay, so far in chapter 14, we've talked about reflections and translations. So the last thing we're going to talk about before your quiz on Thursday is rotations. So this is like when you think about you're actually rotating an object, so you're turning it around some sort of center of rotation. So this first section talks about the rotation being about a fixed point called the center of rotation. So for example, in this picture here, you have uh, A, C, and A prime. So A is being rotated around C. So C would be your center of rotation. The angle of rotation is 120 degrees. It rotated by 120 degrees. I'm actually not going to fill that part out because it's just time consuming. But the important thing you need to know from up here is that the direction of a rotation can either be clockwise or counterclockwise, so like the hand on the clock goes, or the opposite way. But we should assume that all rotations are counterclockwise, so they all go to the left, is another way to think of it. So there's a few different types of rotations that we have. You could have one that's 90 degrees, 180 degrees, or 270 degrees about the origin. There are some rules that we can follow for those three rotations that make your life a lot easier. So let's go ahead and talk about those. So the first is for a 90-degree rotation. So if you have a 90-degree rotation, what you should do, first of all, is multiply your y-coordinate by 1. Here we go. Multiply. So you're multiplying your y-coordinate by -1, so of your coordinate pair. And then you're going to interchange x and y. So what I mean by that is if you look over at this picture, we have the point P, which is at 5, 2. So to rotate it 90 degrees, so rotate it from the blue to the green, we're going to first of all make the y value negative, so 2 becomes -2, and we're going to flip their places. So -2 becomes the x value, 5 becomes the y value. If you have an 180-degree rotation, all you have to do is multiply x and y by -1. So you're making both the x and the y negative. So for example, in this picture, you have P is at 5, 2. So to rotate it 180 degrees, so along a straight line, I make the 5 negative, so -5, and I make the 2 negative, -2. So 5, 2 becomes -5, -2. If you rotate 270 degrees, you'll see in the picture that's going all the way around, 3/4 of the way around a circle, 270 degrees. The first thing you do is multiply x by -1. And then you interchange x and y, just like you did with the 90-degree one. Okay, so there's your rules we're going to follow. Let's do some examples. So if you look at this triangle down here at the bottom of the page, you have triangle PQR. You're given the vertices are 1, 1, 4, 5, and 5, 1. We graphed it, so it's graphed for you here, PQR. And we're going to rotate it 90 degrees about the origin. So again, if I scroll back up to my rules here, to rotate by 90 degrees, I multiply y by -1, interchange x and y. So I'm going to find my new points here. So my y value of P is 1. So I'm going to multiply that by -1 and stick it in the x slot. And then 1 stays the same. Some of us like to do reflections and translations visually. That's going to be really hard with the rotation, so you should actually find the points. 4, 5, I'm going to make that y value negative, so -5. And then I put 4 in the y slot. For 5, 1 then, I'm going to make that -1 and put it in the x slot, and then 5 becomes my y value. So I'm going to graph now. This is P prime, this is Q prime, and this is R prime. I'm going to graph those to create the image again. We have our pre-image now, we're going to graph the image. So -1, 1, that becomes P prime. -5, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up 1, 2, 3, 4. That becomes Q prime. Ooh, I just like crossed it out. There we go. And -1, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. That becomes our R prime. So now we have the triangle PQR, the image of it. So from P to Q, P to R, and from R to Q. So it's kind of harder to see if something's actually been rotated or not. But this triangle that you have, the blue one, has actually been turned 90 degrees and has ended up at its image, which is QRP. All right, so on to the next page. Go ahead and pause the video for a second and graph this parallelogram. So you're given a parallelogram, FGHJ, and its vertices, F at 2, 1, G 7, 1, H 6, -3, and J is at 1, -3. Pause it and graph that parallelogram. All right, so you should end up with a parallelogram that looks something like this. We are trying to rotate this parallelogram 180 degrees about the origin. So if I go back to our rules on the last page about 180-degree rotation right here, it says to multiply x and y by -1. Okay, so my F point is at 2, 1. Oh, this is going to be big. So to make the image of that, so F prime, I'm just going to make both x and y negative. So -2, comma, -1. Okay, so back to down 1. There is F prime. You can go ahead and graph it. All right, then G. G is at 7, 1. So I'm going to graph its image. Again, we're rotating this 180 degrees, so we just have to make x and y negative. So this becomes -7, -1. So back 7, down 1. And there's my G prime, my image of G. Then H is at 6, -3. So I'm going to multiply both of those by a negative. So what you'll see here, since your original point, 6, -3, has a negative number in it, when I figure out its image, I make 6 negative, so -6, and then -3 becomes +3, because -3 times -1 is a positive. So I'm going to go back 6, up 3, and there's my image of H. And then lastly, I have J, which the original point is at 1, -3. So to figure out the image, again, I'm going to multiply both x and y by a negative. So -1, 3. I switch the signs, essentially, is what I'm doing. So I go back 1, up 3. There is my image of J. And now I can connect those 4 dots to graph the rotated image of my parallelogram. Use your straight edge to do this. All right. So you'll see this has been rotated all the way around, about halfway around a circle, because it's 180 degrees. Okay, then lastly, we have this multiple choice question. So it says parallelogram WXYZ is rotated 180 degrees counterclockwise about the origin. Which of these graphs represents the resulting image? Okay, so here's our pre-image. We have W is at -6, 3, Z is at -2, 3, X is at -5, -3, and Y is at -1, -3. So we're trying to figure out which one's correct. So we know that the rules for 180 degrees is that our image should have the X and Y values multiplied by -1. So if my W value, I'm pulling this from the image here, W is at -6, 3, I know that W prime, or its image, should be 6, -3, because I know I have to switch the signs of each for a 180-degree rotation. So I'm going to look for W that's at 6, -3. This W is at 3, 6. This W is at 6, negative 3, but we should check all of our answers. This W is at negative 3, 6, not quite right, and this W is at negative 3, 1. So the only option that works is this. So H is the parallelogram that has been rotated 180 degrees about the origin. All right, when you are done, go get your homework for the day, which is worksheet 14.6 from This Up.